And there's so much lefty lunacy for us to choose from each and every week. And thank you to all those who send material to us. We are flooded with lefty lunacy, more and more of it every single day of our lives. Rita, talk to us about Jeremy Clarkson.
Well, he's had enough of lefty lunacy as well. He's come out and he has just had a red-hot go at everyone from snowflakes to Greta Thunberg to Jeremy Corbyn. And his comments about Jeremy Corbyn, I thought, were very interesting. Let's have a look.
It's ABC for me, just in case you're trying to narrow me down. Anything but Corbyn. I mean, I lived through the 70s. I know what socialism is, and I've seen it at work around the world in places like Cambodia and Venezuela and what have you. It doesn't work, and it dangerously doesn't work. But, you know, when he goes, well, these, how did he, with these glasses like this, no, you can't even arrange these, for the many, not the few. And everyone goes, oh, that sounds nice, even though his glasses aren't on straight. And buy into it, whereas, of course, those of us who are old enough to remember just know it's a hopeless, hopeless proposition.
He makes an excellent point. Anywhere it's been tried, it has led to absolute devastation and failure and misery. And yet we've got something like over 40% of young people who think it's a preferred system to what we have. So
well, that's
good on him for coming out strongly.
Well, that's a failure of the schools. I mean, we've spoken over and over and over again about all of these polls, but I think it's funny, you want to pull that back around to some of this stuff we were talking about terrorism earlier in the show. I think that the schools, we really need to look at what goes on in these schools that don't make people feel like this whole system, this whole society we have is worth being a part of, worth fighting for, and it leads to everything from people feeling like they can get radicalized into some sort of terrorism to going out and saying, oh, I'll be a socialist. That's good because this whole capitalist system, which has given us riches and iPhones and roofs over our head, and, you know, we don't have to eat our pets and we can actually use toilet paper instead of the currency, that it just doesn't work.
But you say the failure of the education system. I would go much harder than that and say that there's a deliberate plan by the education authorities, by public servants, by others to downplay. In the case of Britain, why don't they know about socialism? It was the great Margaret Thatcher who brought socialism to an end in Britain, but of course she was demonised, and the teachers there will never talk her name, will never teach about Thatcherism and what it did for that country.
And in Australia, for God knows how many years of the last 2 or 3 decades, we've had supposedly conservative governments in power, and they have done nothing to wind it back. You can't even teach phonics in the schools.
Well, because conservatives, not just in Australia, but in much of the world before Trump, were too scared or thought they were above the culture wars. They thought this didn't matter. We were just going to focus on delivering economic... But you know what? This does matter. This has taken hold. It has been normalised. And now, if you don't subscribe to it, you're cast as a hater, a bigot.
And I'm so glad you said culture wars, because this is something that drives me nuts. You know, you go out there on social media and you say, you know, this shouldn't be happening. And they go, oh, well, you know, stop being such a culture warrior. Why are you being such a culture warrior? And the reason why you should be a culture warrior is because if you're not, then these people take over the schools, and then 50, 60, 70% of kids think that Australia is a terrible, horrible country with a terrible, horrible history, that socialism, not capitalism, is the way forward, that the world is going to end, and then we have an entire generation based on this.
Back to your editorial, you're absolutely right that the ABC, the government's failure to confront the education, our teachers, the government's failure to confront the ABC, the broadcasters, to stand up, and this goes back decades, I'm afraid. Conservative governments abandoned the field. Occasionally John Howard would enter the cultural fray and say, no, we mustn't have a black armband view of history, but not nearly enough. And when those that did, like Tony Abbott or Cory Bernardi, where are they now? The left attacked them and made sure they're gone.
The left's march through the institutions is pretty much complete. It's not just the ABC, the public institutions and the schools. It is now in private enterprise. These kids, those indoctrinated kids, are now running HR departments, and corporate governance and marketing departments. And then you see all these corporate virtue signalling also from our biggest companies, and some of the shareholder activism that's now happening is really quite worrying. There was a fantastic piece on The Australian yesterday about that. So you have to actually be active in these fights.
Absolutely.
Or you give up.
Absolutely. 100%. Well, Scott Morrison, you don't realise it yet, but this is the biggest challenge of your Prime Ministership. We'll be taking on the culture war, as James and Rita say, and winning it.